welcome. I'm Avital, Nathman, and should we introduce ourselves?
Yeah.
Okay. Start that way. I'm a freelance writer. I'm the editor of The Good Mother Myth, Redefining Motherhood to Fit Reality. And I'm working on my second book called The Perfect Birth Myth, a subtitle to be determined. And I'm a mother of an 8-year-old son, and I write a lot about maternal health, motherhood, and feminism, and all of that kind of combined into this experience we just had over the last couple of days, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit.
Hello everyone, I am Natasha Vianna. I am the co-founder of No Teen Shame, which is a national movement started by 7 young moms across the country who wanted to push back against stigmatizing campaigns that target teen parents. I'm also the digital communications manager at the Massachusetts Alliance on Teen Pregnancy. I am a mother of one. I have a daughter who is 9 years old, and I gave birth when I was a teenager.
I'm Sarah Button-Waser, also a writer, contributor to the Good Mother Myth, and I write about a lot of things about parenting, along with a lot of other things. I went to Hampshire. I organized the first Flip conference, however many millions of years ago. What is it, 28? And maybe there were as many people as in this room at the whole conference. So it's, pretty awesome to both be here and see how Flip has grown, and also to have been part of launching a sort of, I don't know, I guess I would say like the next generation of a conference about the next generation of, thinking about different issues.
And are you a mother?
Oh, and I am a mother. Yes, I'm a mother of 4, 3 boys and a girl. And I'm a mother who gave birth to children and who adopted one as well.
So, this past Thursday and Friday, I guess I'll start kind of what we did. We had coffee, which was the Unconference on Feminists. Oh, it's really bugging me. On feminist family equity and experiences. And so what that was, so Sarah and I have been presenting at CLIP for,
I think this is the 4th year.
And Sarah helped found CLIP. I came as a student, and then just as a participant, and then as a presenter for a while. And a lot of our panels, all of our panels, either ones I did with Sarah or ones I did on my own with other people, all centered around something related to do with family. We had a panel on, what was it?
Gender wars.
Gender wars on the playground.
Politics around the coffee.
Around the dinner table. Bringing social justice to the dinner table. One on the Good Mother Myth last year. One on teen mothers a couple years ago. You did a teen mother panel this year. I did one a few years ago with the moms from the care center. And every time we did a panel, I was like, nobody's going to come to our panel. Because CLIP is this wonderful social justice conference, and people are here to talk about abortion, they're here to talk about reproductive rights, they're here to talk about other social issues. Who's going to want to come talk about moms and families? And before our panel, I would be furiously writing down questions to ask ourselves during the Q&A, because I was like, well, no one's going to show up, and if they do, no one's going to have questions for us. So we better be prepared to ask ourselves questions. And
I think you've been proven wrong every year.
Every time. And I think the second panel we did together, I think it was the social justice, it was wall-to-wall people. And people were sitting on the windowsills, but we were probably breaking fire codes. And people stayed afterwards, like maybe a half hour to an hour, asking us questions. And I would say probably not even half were parents themselves.
Yeah.
But they were all invested, whether they had future plans to become parents or whether they were helping to raise kids, even though they weren't parents themselves. or they had siblings. A lot of people had siblings still at home that they wanted to figure out how to bring social justice into their lives. And it was just phenomenal. And I don't remember if we were the ones that thought about it or someone said, we need to have a conference around this, or we need to keep this conversation going. And so we said, well, why don't, there's not really a conference in the vein of CLIP, because that was what we really wanted to model on, where feminism and family intersected. Right? There are a lot of family conferences out there. There are a lot of conferences that focus on family, but not necessarily in a progressive lens.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who write about parenting and really motherhood,
Right.
as sort of like the mom bloggers,
And they've got a space.
They've got a
Sure.
space. It's branded. It's supported by big corporations.
But McDonald's.
Yeah, it's there. I would say for certainly for myself, every time I get those what are they called? They have what are the names of those conferences? There's
Like blogger?
Like blogger, yeah. And they always sort of pop up on my Twitter feed, and I think, oh my God, I'm such a failed person in that sphere. Like what would I do? Would I go to the ball? Yeah.
And I have to say, some of them are doing good work
things.
to bring in a couple, like a feminist panel. Oh, Tope's here. You want to intro yourself before we keep blathering on?
Sure. Hi, I'm Tope Fadiran.
You take a breath first.
Yeah.
No rush.
Writer, editor, single parent. Hi.
Did you do anything?
I'm good. Sorry, I'm late.
So anyway, there are those spaces, but we wanted to do something different. It was,
Because there's also feminist conferences.
there are feminist conferences.
And like we had proven, there is space for families there, but it's not the focus, and it's kind of just an addition, so to speak. So we thought, could we do this? So I tapped into my friends that are phenomenal and doing wonderful things in the intersection of feminism and family. We also had Soraya Shamali, who was with us. She had to go speak somewhere else this weekend, or she definitely would have been here. But she was here on Thursday, and she helped as well organize the event. And so we started by asking ourselves, what did we want to see in a gathering of people who support families? So it was really important to us that it wasn't just aimed at parents, and that it was aimed at anyone who felt that they supported families and that they worked within that sphere. Would that be the right way to describe it? And I would say not everyone was a parent that showed up.
Oh, for sure. Maybe backtracking a little bit to say or one of the things I would like to talk about is how we went from thinking about something that was going to be more structured, as in set agenda, to the more organic conversation of
The unconference.
Of the unconference.
Which was super new to me. Do you want to talk about that since that was your brainchild?
Sure. I don't know if anybody in here has done Roots Camp, but there's Roots Camp, Massachusetts, which is where I was introduced to this idea. So an unconference is basically, like in the morning, people throw up all the ideas that they have for what they want to talk about. And then you just vote on which ideas are of most interest to people, and whatever gets a critical mass becomes what the different panels or discussion groups are for the rest of the day. So when we were discussing putting this together, one thing we really wanted to do was to make sure that we weren't setting the agenda for this is what matters to families, this is what matters to parents. One thing we found in the panels that we've done in the last few years is that we come in with things that we want to talk about, and then the
conversation goes a whole other way.
the audience brings in all these other things that they want to talk about. We never have enough time to talk about all of the issues in the room, and people bring up things that we never even thought about. So we really wanted the agenda to be driven by who was in the room and what they wanted to talk about, not the fact that we're the organizers, therefore we're deciding what you're going to talk about.
Because we've seen that, and I think that also kind of breeds intersectionality, which, let's be honest, is an issue within the feminist sphere, and how do we make sure that everyone's voices, I mean, it could have been very easy that we would have said, these are gonna be the panels, we'll pick the speakers, or they can, and this is what we're gonna discuss. And while the organizer in me that loves lists and spreadsheets would have really appreciated that, that wouldn't have been true to our agenda, which was to really bring in everybody's voices, to help us then kind of build from there. And I was a little nervous about that, but the last 2 days proved that it can work, and that when people get together with a shared interest in mind, that it's phenomenal and invigorating and energizing, and I'm excited to see where this goes. So Thursday we started with a dinner at the Red Barn. And, first I should start, so we talked about the mommy conferences that have
Right.
these massive branding. We needed some form of sponsorship, because we weren't sure how this would work in terms of who's going to want to fund a feminist family unconference, right? And we weren't looking for big bells and whistles. We knew that this would be pretty bare bones and very kind of grassroots, but we still needed money, right? We needed money for food because we wanted this to be accessible for everybody. So we needed money for food. We needed money for childcare, because one of our big sticking points was that we would have we'd be able to provide free childcare to allow people who had kids to come. And we needed a space
And
to
it
have
really
it.
got us the cutest babies ever.
Oh my God, so cute. It satisfied some baby lust.
It really did.
And so we started looking for sponsors, but the first thing we thought, why not see if we could attach ourselves to an already formed conference that would want to act kind of as our
That's our big
big
sister.
sister, as our mommy. And Clip was absolutely generous and supportive and excited for us. They said, we want to see what you guys can do for this. And they provided the space, they provided food as well, they provided breakfast for us, and they provided the support. And so big props to Clip
Yeah,
for,
if you see Lucy Trainer today.
yeah, because I mean, throughout while they were helping us, they were they were preparing for this conference as well. So the fact that they took us on was
Answer
really
every
appreciated.
dumb question. Were you on the other side of that paper write the hashtag from
Oh, yeah.
so that if people are interested in just seeing what that tweeted?
And then we started looking outside the box. Who else would want to give us funding? And we found it in really interesting places. We, Luna pads, cloth pads, gave us money. Oh, I was going to do Marco, make it quicker. Who else were our sponsors? I know it off the top of my head. A hospital, Bay State Health, a local hospital, was interested because they were interested.
They're
I mean, if you want to
interested in
talk
diversity, that's
in diversity, but also really interested in the workplace.
That's true.
Right?
How to make workplaces more family friendly.
So they were happy to contribute to get that part of the conversation going. Two different baby wearing companies, Ergo and Sakura Bloom, both donated, which was wonderful. I'm now trying to, I don't want to leave anyone out. Who else first? Oh, the National, NNEDV, the National Network to End Domestic Violence, was one of our sponsors. Who else am I forgetting?
Mother Woman.
Beans.
Oh, Dean's Beans. Oh, Mother
Dean's
Woman. So
Coffee.
local organization Mother Woman said, well,
Provided
we'll
the
provide
childcare.
childcare.
Which was huge.
Which was so big, and people were so appreciative, and that was brought up throughout the weekend, it wasn't the weekend, it was Thursday, Friday, it's not spam. It's fan equity. And you can look up the hashtag and see people tweeting throughout Thursday and Friday. And so we had a little kernel to start, and we had some money, and so we started organizing, and then we were wondering, would people come? Would people want to talk about this stuff? Oh, yeah.
I just, I was just wondering, how did you advertise the conference? I wish I had known.
I know.
Yeah, well, I'd say answer one, we advertised, we tweeted, Clip posted it.
Yeah, I went out
We
and
reached out, we went out on their sort of but,
The
you know,
listserv.
in my sort of, like, in the 2 weeks before the conference, I started thinking, oh, if I had thought about it, we could have gone on the radio, like, oh, I should have, you know, like, you're doing so much to get it started that, did we get as far out as we needed to? No, and part of why we wanted to do this sort of, hi, Belfry.
Hi.
This piece of the conference and talking about what we did is so that we will get the word out more and have more people help us think about doing a better job of that going forward, because it seems
Yeah, for sure.
like
And we
the
did
most-
also find that when we put it out there, because it was a part of the Click weekend, a lot of people couldn't take off the 4 days that was needed. And so, while it was very useful this year in getting it off the ground, in thinking for next year, because we do want this to be an annual event. So could it be something done on its own weekend?
Or should we, you know, stay
Continue to be,
for a little while longer?
and the small
We
size
welcome-
helped
yeah.
Welcome
too.
people's ideas about that. I'm curious, if you had heard about it, what would you have wanted to talk about? Do you have, I mean, not to put you on the
Oh,
spot.
no, it's okay. So many things. And on the top of my head, what's on my mind a lot recently is re-entry into the paid workforce after being at home with my kids. I have 2 children, one's 3.5 and the other 7 months.
Bless you.
And I've just been surprised with how hard it is to get back into the game. Well,
That
not
was
the
brought
game,
up.
but like the paid
The
workforce.
pace-
I
the
feel like
pace.
I've never worked harder in my life.
Yeah,
It's just
exactly.
hard to get it all to translate and then have like a career that has gaps, but that have the gap define where the rest of my career is gonna go.
I think that's something that is just such an important conversation in how we pace our lives
Yeah.
as parents.
And for those of you that do have Twitter, and if you look up the hashtag, there's a few pictures that during our second day, we did what Tope was mentioning in that we started the morning off just throwing up every single topic we wanted to talk about. We filled a whiteboard, and so we took some pictures of it so you can see the topics that were brought up, but definitely economics, job, workplace environment was brought up multiple times. And I think that was one of the breakout discussions later
Yeah.
that day. And we created a Facebook group as well to keep the conversation going so it wouldn't just drop. And it's a private group, but you can search for it. It's Coffee, all caps. And I think it's Coffee Equity,
Yeah, just like the Twitter handle.
just like our Twitter handle. So you'll be able to find it. And
You can join.
yeah, you can
Yeah.
join it.
We did have, so towards the end on Friday, we asked folks to give suggestions about where they thought we could go next year in terms of like whether we should do something more structured and what the focus might be. And we had a really good idea, was it from
Annette. From Mother.
to start with local conversations about, you know, families and equity, which I think is something that we should think about really seriously just in the next year, because not every, you know, if we keep it attached to Clip, not everybody's gonna be able to come, and if we do it on a separate weekend, not everybody's in, you know, like 2 weekends is also a lot, right? So how can we get that conversation going even for folks who might not be able to, you know, travel
Yeah.
here or,
And I think
We
that
did have
also,
some geographic reach
Right,
from
yeah.
the conference,
Right.
so.
right,
but I think that also satisfied, a lot of people came and we brought up so many, you know, we talked about, or we brought up birth politics, we brought up class issues, we brought up the changing definition of family, we brought up workplace issues, we brought up, so
Like
many
the
different,
culture shift.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the question that kept coming up is, so what do we do now? Like, what can we do? And a couple of people, Celia from ServiceNet was there, and she had some great ideas just about starting within her own community, that she has a 14-year-old son as a single mother, and she hosts these women groups once a month. And was it the last time she hosted, he chose to sit in the group for the first time and participate, and she said,
Since he was small.
since he was small, right, they had been doing this for years, but it was the first time he independently chose to be a part of the group. And that's something you, I mean, that's where you start. That's how you start making some change. Because a lot of it felt so overwhelming when we were talking about especially workplace politics, and maternity leave, of course, always comes up, sick time, family leave, all of that, flexible work hours. And it can feel overwhelming in terms of where do you start. Is it policy change? Is it politics? We had someone who was on, was Gina Louise a select woman?
She's a city councilor.
A city councilor. And she was saying that she wishes there was a way to get more people into politics whose voices need to be there, but when meetings are happening at certain times and there's no childcare provided, and so it's the voices of the retired old white men who have the time to be in city politics.
And I just have to say that in Northampton, that where Bessel was our semi-retired white male city councilor in my ward, and what did I just agree to do in the middle of the night? Yes, be by name, at least, the co-chair, no.
Oh, I thought you were going to run.
Of the next person who's semi-retired white male. Anyway, to fill the seat. But I don't know who else is gonna do it. He's a good guy, has good politics. So, I'm perpetuating the problem, but I'm gonna reach out to people and hope to groom the next. I would never do
But
it.
handle him.
Yeah.
He's,
but what I would like to do in terms of engagement at that local level is figure out how to bring these issues into the conversation about how do we make the city council more accessible to people, and rather than try to find the candidate right now, to sort of use my support of a good guy, with
I should
Gina
say the
Lee's,
people, especially
to have,
our
to have a
people,
different
but
set of
don't
conversations about how do we make city politics more accessible to people and less frustrating, and on the flip side, the school committee just voted this budget for the schools, which still keeps the high school starting at 7:30 in the morning. To me, this is not a family policy. And
You guys have been fighting for that.
we've been fighting for years, so change is slow.
I think the other piece of it was like two sort of complementary issues, or like flip sides of the same issue, I think, came up. One being like folks who had spent a lot of time at home with their kids were parenting in like fairly nuclear family structures, felt really isolated, and like they didn't have enough support. And there were also folks in the room, myself included, who come from family backgrounds and cultural backgrounds where the nuclear family is not the like dominant model. My family is Nigerian, like very large extended family. How we think of how family interacts and who's responsible for each other, and like how children are reared is very different. It's not like you got like two parents and like they're solely, responsible for the upbringing of this child. Like it really is more of a community and like extended family network, extended community network thing. And I grew up with my cousins and like that, the older cousins look out for the younger cousins, that sort of thing, which is a family model that one I think has like is much more sustainable for most people, and also I don't see represented or really spoken about in a lot of mainstream feminist conversations. So one of the threads that came up both nights was how do we build that kind of integrated community, like a multi-generational community, and also creating kind of culture shift where we move away from this idea that it's both unsustainable and really unhealthy, that like, you have your own little domain with your children and you're solely responsible for them, and whether or not like things go well or poorly is just sort of all on you and whatever choices you make, whether they're good or bad, to more of a model where we're all invested in each other's families and each other's children being healthy and supported and getting what they need.
I was just gonna add on to that like you saying that is something that really hits home for me, not only because I actually have a family who is very community oriented, but my family is like not the family that I would want to raise my children in, if that makes sense. And so like that also is like something that I feel like is really isolating, like as preparing to have a family, like thinking like, how can I build that community when when all the people that I have in my life are not the people I want to be around my kids, you know what I mean? And like that's like a really tough thing to deal with.
That sort of family of origin, chosen family.
And that was brought up, the
Yeah.
chosen
What,
family.
how to bring the good pieces. I was thinking about actually not at Clip yesterday, but my husband's out of town, so I had my 2 young kids, and then I had 2 more. One of my good friends is in the middle of chemo, and so I had 2 of her kids yesterday, and I sort of before the weekend, I thought, well, I want to go to Clip, but then I get a babysitter. But then if I'm home, I can have Millie and Addie, who could really use a place where they're the most comfortable to be, that gives the parents a break to just get through feeling sick for the weekend, because Megan had chemo on Friday. And it's that chosen family, and I've been thinking this weekend how those, I'm managing the care calendar for them, how really it's a very radical and feminist kind of refiguring of family, that in a crisis we've actually, and partly through the internet, created a model where we can help each other in these ways that are really extended family ways, where family can't step in. And how maybe crisis helps us shift how we think about family and how we think about raising ours. I mean, it's sort of like the village in action.
Didn't someone say, like on Saturday, that it's when like you need that kind of support that you start thinking differently about, like it's when you're in these moments in your life where like you need extra hands,
You're
and
like,
that you realize like how limiting
important,
really
and how limiting it is, how important it is, how and that you can create. I mean, if you ask, you can find the people to step forward, but you have to ask.
Right.
And it's work, because I mean, specifically, we've chosen to only have 1 child, and that was a conscious choice on our part. But part of that, making that choice, was knowing that we would have to create intentional community for our son.
Yeah.
Because we did not want him to grow up without siblings, even though we only wanted 1 child. And siblings doesn't have to mean blood related. Like right now, he's with who I jokingly refer to as my sister wife. I actually nursed her child when she was younger, and we're that close. And he's there with his friend who's the same age, and her younger brother who looks up to my son as an older brother. And so he's got that family, and he's got that support. And I also made a conscious choice to include friends who don't have kids. So he's got a lot of uncles and aunts that they get something out of hanging out with him, and he gets something out of hanging out with them. But it's work. It takes a lot of work, but it does pay off, because I had my own health crisis the last couple months, and I didn't have to worry about sending out a group text to make sure that my son was picked up from school, somehow he was fed, somehow was taken care of on a snow day, in which we had many of them during this time period that I had to, and that I didn't, and that people were I was told not to apologize, or each time that, well, don't you remember when we had our baby and you managed our meal train and you were there making sure I had comfortable underwear, like little silly things like that, and it's like, well, of course I would do that, but when you're in your moment of crisis, you're not thinking about, of course your friends will do that for you. But we had been building this community and this intentional community, not from a point of crisis, but from a point of intention, because of having a singleton. Ideally in my mind, I think of like the kibbutz mentality in Israel, where everyone kind of lives communally. But I've also seen that not work out so well. So it's nice to be all of our own places, and we're a couple blocks from each other, driving distance or biking distance. But it takes a lot of work. Yeah. But having a family of 5 or 6, I'm sure takes a lot of work too. So it's
a piece of cake. 4 children.
And this discussion really comes back to practicing what you preach and what we did yesterday. And so we can talk and talk and talk about community and sharing power and how everybody is an expert, but we put that into practice. You know, a few days ago when we brought parents, mothers, non-parenting family members, and just people who want to support families into the room and to offer their expertise to each other. And I mean, we were practicing what we were preaching, where like one mom like was, you know, holding another baby, and a mom with a toddler who wanted to hold a baby, but they like exchanged, and we were just doing that. Again, that was just like bringing exactly what we want to see happening out there into the room as we were discussing that. So it was really important for me to see that power being
And that
shared.
everybody's in that way equally an expert. There wasn't, which is interesting because having been a mother for a long time, often I find myself in situations with people who have younger kids who sort of think, well, you must know more because you've been doing it longer. And I know longer. I don't know if I know more, I know longer. And there's, I mean, maybe there's certain things I know more because I've done them 4 times, but, you know, like, I've messed up on bedtime 4 times over. I'm so good at messing up on a bedtime, but, you know, it didn't feel that way. It didn't feel like there was any sort of wise say it, which is great. I mean, not that there isn't a place for people who've had experience to share it, but that everybody has experiences to share, and that they were on a similar platform was kind of amazing.
I have a question related to that and the unconference agenda, because I love that. I've never experienced that before, but were there ever any topics that came up that you felt like there weren't actually the tangible expertise in the room to answer, and how, because I think it's the best part about that is that you harbor the expertise, the lived expertise, but were there any topics where you were like, you know, we actually get to know about, you know, the laws or the policies or the strategies to access
I
certain
think there was
things?
a sense of, well, we don't know how will we make that change. Will we go to the Hill? You know, there was a sense of almost like a running list of questions coming up that people wanted to know more about, and could we find somebody who would help us think about that? So there was like there was partial expertise in the room about everything. And then there were almost like the list of things you'd wanna like life Google, you know, find people, not just find the answer, but really, find, you know.
We had a good mix, I feel
Yeah,
like.
yeah,
Because
we had
I
a
feel
great
like
mix.
Thursday night when we had our dinner, we tried to make sure people didn't sit with just people that they knew, then spread out. So I was sitting at a table where I knew one person, and then our conversation, I mean, this is what I lived for. We started talking about doula access and birth access, and at my table was a doula that's part of the Green River Doula Network here in Western Mass, and she's also an RN student. Also at my table was the executive director of Choices in Childbirth, an organization in New York City that works to ensure choices in childbirth for a variety of communities, and works to get access. And they actually were part of this New York Times article on doula access a month or so ago. And I just sat back and watched these two talk, and I was like, this is why we're here. And then the conversation turned to Purvi Patel. And it's a woman, for those of you who don't know, that was charged and sentenced to 20 years in prison for a miscarriage, for having a miscarriage, and in Indiana. And so we talked about that. And then our conversation veered towards a little bit pop culture and the NBC miniseries, The Slap, but then that turned us into talking about corporal punishment. And then we finished by, passing around iPhones and sharing pictures of our kids and dogs. And I was like, this is what I wanted this to be, that we had these conversations ranging from birth politics to parenting, to reproductive health issues with Purvi Patel, to talking about our children and looking at like Christmas pictures and whatever. And then that was able to keep going the next day in a much more concrete way. And yeah, but we brought, so we had Michelle from Choices in Childbirth. We had Annette Saikon from Mother Woman, who's done a lot of policy and action. They helped get paid sick leave passed in Massachusetts last year. We had Gina Louise, who is a city councilwoman. But then everybody else who brought their own experiences and their own, I mean, we learned in our small breakout group, we had this woman, Samantha Wood, who for a long time worked the second shift at the Greenfield Recorder,
Which is one of our local papers.
a local paper around here. And she talked, and now she's the editor, right?
She's the news director.
The news director, yeah. But for a long time, she was the second shift, and she had, at that point, now she has a teenager, but she had a toddler. But she worked with a bunch of conservative old guys, and she was super stressed out. She had gotten this job, and she didn't want to lose it, but they couldn't find childcare because of the hours. It was a really,
There were a couple
hours,
before.
like evening time. And the other people were like, well, just bring your child to work. That's what we did.
Yeah.
And I was floored. I kept having her like repeat that over and over. I'm like, tell me more how that works. Like,
Yeah.
and she goes, well, that's how work gets done, and they understood that. And so we tried. Well, how can we connect that to other like how does it work? That was one of our sticking points because we looked at Google. We're like, Google's another place that's like awesome where they have family leave and. Well, but that was the point. That was the point, right? That they've got a lot of money. They don't need to worry about that kind of thing. So how do we go from the Greenfield Recorder, this independent paper that has no money but is able to do this because they don't have these constraints from HR because they are their own HR, to Google, but where everyone else works in the middle? And so that was one of our sticking points. Like, how do we find that middle ground?
Yeah, so I come to this space as someone who's hoping to parent and always struggles with thinking about what that means for my activism and like how I can continue to be an activist and have a child or a family. So I was just wondering if that came up, and also like Natasha, if you could speak to that, because I know you do a really good job.
Thank you. That did come up, and it came up in different ways, right? So there were a few moms who were new moms who were talking about the reality that prior to becoming moms, they were very active. They were attending meetings, they're board members, they're at rallies, protests, and then they get pregnant, and then they have their babies, and then there are all these dialogues that start happening. Because then there are dialogues maybe with your partner who might not feel comfortable with you taking your baby to like a Black Lives Matter rally, or doesn't feel comfortable with you taking your child to a meeting that might go until midnight. And so those conversations came up, and I think the reality is like finding that balance. And my thing really is, in raising my daughter, she's been attending meetings with me since she was a baby. And it's like, if I can't take her, I can't attend, and if they're not providing childcare, I can't go. And so I'm bringing my baby. Like, you can't invite me to a meeting to talk about like lack of childcare and tell me I can't bring my kid. So I have taken my daughter to just about everything I want to do, and for two reasons. One is children are left out of the movement, and they don't find out about these things until they're in high school, college, or after college. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the spaces aren't inclusive of children. And not just saying, yeah, bring your kid, that's fine, like we'll like ignore your kid. But like really including children in the conversation and letting them be a part of that and hearing that. So like my daughter hears everything. She's 9 now, and she can explain more things than like, some people my age can. And that's because I've been taking her to these things, and it's like you're getting like 2 birds with 1 stone, right? So I'm being able to participate in these things. I'm being able to be the activist that I wanted to be and can be. And she's also learning, and she's meeting really cool people who I'm like, how did you just go and talk to Loretta Ross? She'll go up to random people and talk to them and ask questions, and like that for me is like important in this journey as a parent, because there aren't opportunities for kids to learn about social justice issues and be involved. And even if she's just hearing little bits and pieces, she's going to be familiar with these words. So like when she's 20, she'll know what reproductive justice is. Abortion will be a normal word for her. And that's culture change. Bringing your kids into these things is culture change, because now my daughter has like she has like a Latina feminist button that she wears on her backpack. And she wears it to school, and I'm like always waiting for like that one, like He goes to like a mostly like white school, and like everyone's super conservative, and so I'm just like waiting for the moment when someone asks me a question, and her teacher was like, so what's this button about? Found out her teacher was like a huge feminist and was like so excited to have another feminist in her classroom, who she can like talk to and not feel like, oh my god, I can't talk about these things with kids because like their parents don't talk to them about like feminism, it's the F word. And to know that there was one kid in her classroom who she could be like, you know, so what do you think of Gloria Steinem? And one kid would be like, oh, I like her hair. So that's my answer.
My 16-year-old, when he was maybe 11 or 12, said to me, there was an anti-death penalty rally in town. He's like, can we go to the vigil? And I went, okay. But I had one of my younger kids was with me at that moment, and so I just, dragged my 8-year-old to the death penalty, and it opened up some conversations that were a little more vulnerable than maybe I would have chosen for an 8-year-old, and at the same time, on balance, being part of making change felt better, and I think that's, those kinds of, where do you, sometimes you're making a choice of exposing something that you might have waited a little longer for, but okay. And knowing that it probably will both sink in and go over their heads at the same time, I think that's all right.
I think, the flip side of what Natasha was saying is, these spaces aren't inclusive of children. They're not inclusive of parents, right? And that's why, they are in the sense that you can come into the space if you act like just like the folks who don't have kids.
Right.
And parents and caretakers of children, just in general, guardians. You're welcome as long as you don't inconvenience anybody by bringing a child into the space. And so it ties into this conversation about how do we create multi-generational spaces, and also how do we make our movement like walk the talk that is, because the mindset, and actually, speaking of like conservative versus liberal divides, I found that politically and socially conservative spaces are often much more welcoming of kids than supposedly progressive spaces are, in the setting, now we're activists and activism is like adult work, and so like we're going off to do our adult things, and that's extremely hostile to children and their caretakers, I think. And this idea that like you should never have to be inconvenienced by, like, I get it. Like I have a 6-year-old, like it is frustrating not to be able to finish a sentence. Like it's frustrating, but that's life, and I think I was saying at my table at dinner, like one of my big frustrations, and has been, I had my daughter at 25, which isn't young by any like measure, like globally. It's young in a lot of this movement, right? And I started. My daughter was like a year and a half to when I started really getting more involved in activist spaces, more as a writer than as an organizer. But I look around and where are the moms? Like, this is a feminist movement, and the folks who are my age who are the most visible and getting the most like attention and resources are people who don't have kids, which obviously like all family structures always should be supported, but most women will at some point become parents. So if you have a movement that doesn't have visible parent leaders, like what are we actually doing?
Right, and in certain worlds where you would be a visible leader, maybe not only the movement, but say, business, where you could have the kid, but you're not really having time to raise the kid because you're pushing in the world. It's a different model than kind of wrapping around in some other.
Right. And I think in a lot of different ways that this is a conversation that happens in movement spaces around a lot of different issues, but the ways in which we've made activism like a luxury, you know, like, you know, if you're in and this came up at dinner too, like unpaid internships and, you know, working like not for a living wage and.
Or as our friend Louise said, even being a city councilor, which 7 o'clock meetings that are not child friendly, you know.
Yeah.
And doesn't pay a living wage.
It doesn't pay a living wage.
Yeah, so I think part of the conversation is like, how do we make the movement, you know, it's not just the work, like in the sense of like, I'm going to a rally or, you know, I'm working for this legislation or whatever, like, we have to move towards creating these spaces that actually are like multi-generational and intentionally inclusive of and centering of people who are taking care of kids and of kids themselves. And I think that was one of the big questions that emerged from Saturday is how do we actually do that? And I think is probably going to end up being a big focus of whatever conversation we have next year about like what are some concrete ways to move towards.
I mean, CLIP in that way was revolutionary for me because I also had my son at the same age, and I came to CLIP back then, and I didn't see other people my age that had a baby, you know, nursing, but I was there nursing while I still remember watching Shelby Knox was here. It was when she was her documentary had just came out, so she wasn't quite a force in the movement yet. But nobody batted an eye that I was sitting there nursing this baby and taking in and learning and, you know, wanting to talk about sex ed in high schools. Like it wasn't odd to do that while, you know, I had a kid at my breast. And I would love to see that model in more places because there's so many great conferences out there between social justice and feminism, but they're not, a lot of them are not family friendly.
We also came up in it from a couple different folks, the siloing of funding and the siloing of issues. Like now we're going to talk about homelessness. Now we're going to talk about poverty. Now we're going to talk about like family-friendly workplace policies. And I think it also came up in our like breakout group about, you know, birth politics and how one of the ways that activists in that space are starting to create culture shift around like birth choices in childbirth is by drawing parallels to like choices in how you die. So like, you know, we're not gonna, or like in hospice care, like we don't force someone to sit, or at least like we wouldn't consider it progressive to force someone to sit in, you know, someone who's aged and at the end of their lives to sit, you know, uncleaned for 12 hours. So why would we, you know, for, you know, like cry it out methods or like, you know, these really sort of rigid scheduling methods for babies, for infants, like neither of those are ways of treating another human being with humanely and with dignity. And you know, I think it was Michelle who was drawing this parallel. I was like, you know, if we had integrated spaces, we wouldn't have to make these arguments about like, well, the things, the way that we treat people around birth, where, you know, natal parents and babies are parallel to how we treat people who are about to die. I'm like, well, everybody is born and everybody dies. Like why, the fact that we even have that separation of something that's part of one life cycle is indicative of how much we've isolated these issues and these stages of life from each other. And I feel like if we are able to move towards these spaces where people in different stages of life, people dealing with different issues, are in the same space and caring about each other and investing in each other, that naturally, like these narratives that understand that like all of these issues are connected and like part of the same like ecosystem.
Right, but riffing on that, we talked about how in the workplace you might not be a parent and that you might look down upon, well, those people with kids aren't going to work as much. Well, at some point your parent might need care for, and you might need that time off, not maternity leave, but family leave, because you need to take care of a mother or father. And but until that happens to you personally, and that was something we also talked about, was entry points into this conversation, and which I want to kind of put back on all of you and why you're here at this panel, because